because we're a continent, we've been at the heart of many global solutions. You know, we have witnessed how South African scientists are leading the way in virus sequencing, how Ethiopian Airlines is no longer an African airline, but a global cargo company and even a global airline. How they've played a significant role in delivering COVID vaccine across the world. And finally, how fintech innovators are paving the way to solutions that can solve some of the world's problems. So this panel will explore the Africanization of global fintech. To lead this panel, I'm inviting to the stage Aubrey Hruby, a senior fellow at the Africa Center of the Atlantic Council and the co-founder of Insider PR and Tofino Capital, and a very special thank you. Aubrey, you'll understand why.
Thank you all. Everyone else can come too. Let's speed this process. This is a good reminder that life isn't just about software, it's about hardware as well. So, thank you much. All right, it's my pleasure to be leading, don't be so far, to lead this panel. We are missing one of our panelists today who couldn't make it into DC in time. But we're really talking about a conversation that I think started with Chinedu and Tosin earlier, which is the interaction of globalization, globalizing the tech plays in African markets, and how the interaction between global capital, global talent, and the expansion that companies are having. So let me first start with you, last time we saw each other was in Cairo, and you were talking a lot about the launch in Europe of the Flutterwave tool for diaspora. And so I want to hear a little bit about that and how you see these channels of, say, diaspora remittances as being a good way to globalize and take the Flutterwave experience outside of Africa, but to Europe and the US.
Yes, absolutely. So from the get, our focus and our mission has always been, is it too loud, everything? Yeah. Our focus and our mission has always been to bring Africa and Africans into the global payments ecosystem. Now, the first realization of that has to be solving the problem at home, right? So how do we make it easier for African businesses and consumers to transact with each other at home? Now, once you get a kind of a solid footing on that, it's important to start to bring in the rest of the world. And that's really well tied into the theme of this panel, and that's what really fuels our desire to expand into other parts of the world, starting with Europe and North America. We see a lot of transactions, whether it's B2B, whether it's P2B, flowing between Africa and other parts of the world. And so the next stage is, how do we build the bridge between Africa and the rest of the world? A really good place to start is with remittances. I'm sure most of us in this room are no stranger to all the data that's out there on mostly P2P remittances that flow into Africa. And so to get a foothold on connecting Africa to the rest of the world, it's important that remittance is a big part of that. Till today, you hear many stories and you see many examples of how challenging it can be to remit sometimes, the costs.
Yeah, but you know, we've been talking about that for, my career in Africa for 20 years. Yeah. Everyone's always like, oh, well, this is going to disrupt Western Union. And, these big guys are still so prevalent in the market. How does Flutterwave kind of take away from that? I mean, really, because I've seen probably 4 dozen different plays on the remittance thing, yeah, and none of them seem to reach scale.
So I don't think that you're going to displace a Western Union. I don't think that you're going to displace a MoneyGram or any of the other incumbent remittance companies, because at the end of the day, the reality is, in many parts of the world, Africa inclusive, there's a large part of the population that still doesn't have access to digital banking or digital financial ecosystems. And so for that reason, you will always have a need
For the
to
cash.
service those people. I think that what's important is that incumbents who have been in this space for decades understand that there's also a digital shift. And you can see that in a lot of, I mean, we don't sit in their strategy meetings, right? But we can see how their products have evolved over the last decade. I think it's important for incumbents to understand that a shift is happening and be well positioned for that shift, in the same way that it's very important for fintechs who primarily want to focus on on the digital side to also understand there is a big opportunity in the cash and the offline side of things, and start to think of ways in which we can also enter that space. I think that that's the critical thing.
Actually, I saw you nodding your head to a lot of things that O said. How do you view that same space?
Well, I think she's covered it well. I think I agree with that. I think the question is, for fintechs in general, are you, in some cases, disrupting the traditional way of doing things, or are you disrupting the way business is done? Which means, do I see a world in the next 5 years or 10 years in Africa, or frankly even in developed parts of the world, where there will not be a bank at all? I think the answer to that question is likely a no. So you're always going to play in a space where you're partnering with the financial system and people in the financial system. And I think, like in her example, if I have to kind of think of that world and say, okay, you can think of, is Western Union and MoneyGram not going to exist at all? And the same way as you might want to think that a bank in the UK or in Africa may or may not exist at all, right? And it may so happen that in this process, some of the people who are less efficient might consolidate or go away, but some of the bigger guys are unlikely for that to happen. So
But isn't the bigger challenge enlarging the pie of the banked and the digital? When you read statistics, particularly on Nigeria, you see that a lot of competition is happening for the same urban elite who are digital, right? And the prevalence of cash and digitization still is limited. And so the question I think we all have is, how do you enlarge that pie? Or do you enlarge it by going and finding and connecting the digital that are abroad, the digital that are around in the global space, rather than kind of enlarging the banked population?
And maybe I can give you a bit of an answer, because Cellulant right now, we're out there raising capital in our Series D round, and I talked to a lot of investors over the last few months, and one of the challenges has been that a bulk of the capital that has come into Africa for investment actually has been out of the United States now, more recently.
62%, 65%.
US, Europe are the primary investors, and when you're talking to them, at least slightly different from Flutterwave, but we focused on actually solving the local problem, which is how do I solve, capital flowing across a supply chain in Africa, and today the only way that's happening is actually taking cash from the master distributor to from the retailer to the distributor to the master distributor, and so on and so forth. And there are like 7 layers through which millions of naira are flowing through, right? And we're digitizing that. And as we do that, we're solving a local problem of actually saying, let's digitize the way we do this business ecosystem. But now, when you are sitting in the developed part of the world and you're trying to visualize what that problem means, it's a harder story to talk about. It's easier to say, listen, there's $40 billion of capital coming in from the United States and Europe into Africa, and it seems like a simpler thing to do. You see what I mean? So I think it's differentiated. There are pros and cons of solving local problems, and there are pros and cons of addressing the elite needs that you're talking about.
Well, it's also the limitations of understanding the local problem, as you mentioned, right? So, but I do think, the funding rounds we've seen from Sabi and from Omnibiz and from Wasoko and others who are digitizing informal trade, I think they end up selling it globally as cutting out middlemen. But in reality, you're making informal markets more productive. And that's a reality that's not their day-to-day, so it's hard for them to understand all these different layers and moving cash to them. Emeka, how has TeamApt really addressed some of these constraints of the limits of the bank system locally?
I think because when we first started out, we actually were building out solutions for the banks. So we were able to see firsthand what a lot of these problems were. Yeah. So when we eventually started building solutions directly and building out an agency network, that was how we started. It wasn't that difficult for us to see where they were being inefficient and where we could actually be more efficient and the areas we needed to focus on. So I think the experience of working with banks actually laid the groundwork for us to be able to see what exactly we needed to do to be more efficient. And I think that's how we're able to be successful in building out one of the largest agency banking networks in Nigeria, and now pivoting that to a business banking solution to service all businesses. So I think I agree with what they both said. The banks might not end up being cut out completely, but the more traditional ones and the ones that are more averse to changing based on the reality would eventually actually get eroded out. So the stronger ones will stay, and fintechs will continue to partner with them.
Yeah, so I want to switch to another question of the global aspect here. How are you all attracting global talent? Because I hear again and again that talent is one of the constraints from the startups in their growth plans, and everyone who raises money, what do they want to do first is hire right people. So how has that been, and what have been your process? Maybe Akshay, let's start with you.
Okay, I was hoping to go last on this one, but I think, look, I think we've so far, I'm probably the only non-African in the business at all. So we're like, out of the 400 people, there are 399 Africans in our business. And we've been talking about this because for some of the key positions, we were looking out for talent, and we just couldn't find the exact right thing that we were looking for. And there was a big debate in our business about saying, should we go hire from South Africa, which we don't consider as Africa, sorry about the guys who are out here, should we go hire out of, India, should we go hire out of the Middle East, and so on and so forth. We started doing that because we didn't have a choice. But I realized that, and then some people came up and they said to me that, listen, why, we are an African business. And shouldn't we be hiring in Africa? And I said, yeah, but we need the people in Africa to be providing us with that gap. And when you think about it, if you're a business in the US, right, nobody thinks about Uber going and hiring a full engineering team in Europe, in Estonia. Yeah. You never consider that you hire non-Americans to go and build an American business, right? But somehow that question gets thrown at Africans, like you're doing some kind of blasphemy, that why are you going and hiring outside of Africa? And I just don't understand that, right? Like we are building, if you want to build a global business, right, and you want to build a globally competitive business, then you got to go hire talent from wherever the best talent is available. And some of it is in Africa, but not all of it is in Africa.
Well, it's also a question like, let's say you're expanding, you're going from Nigeria to Pakistan. You want a lot of your team to be aware of the knowledge of the market, that when we were just talking this local knowledge, so you probably need Pakistanis on the team. Yeah. So a nature of global expansion, and if you look at American companies, for sure, like if you look at Uber's operations in various countries, they have local, they're trying to hire talent there. So I do think that the talent question is global, and a lot of American companies have their back-end teams sitting in India, as we all know, when we call different phone numbers or lines, et cetera. So I don't know, I'd love to hear a little bit, from you on talent, especially as you guys have expanded into new markets and hiring in Europe and those kind of things.
Yeah, I think as an African company, it's very important for us that we have Africans on the team to help shape our perspective as we build products and strategize on different markets. I think the thing to recall about fintech specifically in Africa is it's just not as developed as the rest of the world. And so some of the talent that you need to go from being just an African company to a global company unfortunately just does not sit in Africa today, right? Maybe you want someone who has had 20, 25 years experience in building a technical consumer product.
Right.
It might be really hard to find that talent on the continent, and we have to focus on the ultimate goal of this is the problem that we're trying to solve. As much as possible, let's build Africa up in the moment as far as talent goes, but you also have to prioritize.
But how do you attract it? I mean, is there like, how do you make it sexy enough to get those people to want to join?
I think that work has been done over the last few years. I think that Africa is a hot topic across the world today. Fintech in Africa is a hot topic across the world today. And so when you're in a position where you've been able to show the viability of a business, and you've been able to show that there is actually a market, and there is still a huge potential for growth, it's very exciting for people because fintech in the US, fintech in Europe, or other developed parts of the world, they've innovated, right? They've done the big things many years ago. And so a lot of what you're seeing today are improvements on those innovations, whereas Africa is like a greenfield. There's
well,
so
in many
much
cases, people
I kind of differ with that a bit, not so much, only in some parts. But, the thing is actually, the question is, where are you attracting this global talent to? Because now the question is, you're an African business, if you're an African business that's headquartered in the United States of America, and you say, okay, I want you to join my San Francisco office to run a fintech business in Africa, I think what she's saying is right. Yeah. You tell somebody in San Francisco, hey, I want you to move to Nairobi. And now suddenly for a moment there's a pause, like, can we figure out another alternate destination? I had somebody from South Africa, not even that far in San Francisco, calling me and saying, hey, there have been terrorist attacks in Nairobi. I was like, okay, when was that? I mean, 2000 and whatever. I mean, and when was the last terrorist attack that you had, in London or in Paris or in, do you think about that? You don't. But when you say, hey, you want to move to Nairobi, then suddenly everyone's thinking about the terrorist attack that happened 5 years ago, right? So I think.
But doesn't the remote world, like all of us have been working in various new capacities during COVID, and many, many companies have gone fully remote, right? Twitter, some of the others. So, doesn't the remote world solve some of those challenges?
It does, and it doesn't, because you see, one of the challenges you have of hiring global talent is that you hired somebody with experience in Europe or the Americas or even India for that matter, right? But what they don't have a full understanding of is actually the local market dynamics.
Yeah.
So now the only way to educate somebody of the local market dynamics is actually bring them in at least for some time before you figure out, hey, Nigeria operates like this, Ghana operates like that. And if you don't have that intrinsic understanding, then how do you marry your capabilities to what needs to happen in this local market? Yeah.
I think it's, sorry.
Go ahead, no.
It's also about the people that you're speaking to, right? Anybody who truly believes in the potential of Africa and truly believes in what you're building to address a challenge in Africa, they have that understanding of, I need to be immersed into this, right? If I'm going to come on board, I'm San Francisco based, I'm New York based, but I'm largely building a product that's for the African market. You have to go to Africa. Now, that doesn't always have to manifest in, I'm moving my entire family to Africa. We've had people who've joined the team and done that. We've had people who've joined the team and just gone, visited our countries, spent 2 months with each country, talk to the people, get to know the customers, get to know the merchants. That aspect is very important. And I think that just comes out in the specific people that you're trying to add to your team.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Tosin was saying about meaning too, attracting those people with meaning. Emeka?
Yeah, I agree, but also I think those are like outliers, because I actually believe most of the talents can be found locally. Yeah. Because we have gotten, from when we were still in our infancy stage, we've gotten poached by everyone from Microsoft to Goldman Sachs to. So I think most of the talent can actually be found locally. And if you've reached the stage where you're looking at global expansion, that means you've actually solved some of the problems that exist locally. And to do that, because of how the terrain is locally because of the challenges with infrastructure and other things. You actually have to build a very sturdy product.
Yeah.
So I think most of the technical talent can actually be found locally. The problem that we have experienced is getting poached. And when you have investor funds, you can actually now fight back against that.
Yeah.
So for technical talent, I think it's the select few that you actually have to look for someone that has like 20 years of experience, 30 years of experience, but I think most of the talent actually can be found locally.
So I want to jump in on global growth, but I also want to take a few questions from the audience. So if you have one, raise your hand and I'll come to you and we'll weave them in. But on global growth, you've seen a pattern of, say, Nigerian companies going to Ghana, Nigerian companies coming to Kenya, right? But I always wonder, is it the next right market? And should we be thinking about the Pakistans? Should we be thinking about Bangladesh? Large markets that have similar characteristics, but maybe a little further away. So I kind of want to hear you guys' views on the kind of traditional expansion that African tech has taken kind of in the region, but versus going to other markets. And I know Paga's tried and gone to Mexico, and Lydia, I think, is in Czech Republic and Slovakia. So there are some examples, but would love to hear your views on pan-emerging market expansion. You guys said you were raising Series D. Now it's thinking about those kind of questions, I'm sure, that investors ask.
Yeah, hard one, but I guess I guess when you think about it, people tend to go closer to what they understand more. Yeah. So I would imagine that if you're a Kenyan company, it's easier to understand Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia than it is to understand Ghana, Nigeria, and so the next step is Ghana, Nigeria. So I think it's a little bit of that evolution.
Yeah.
And also I think then the other dynamic which you have to really figure out is some of these markets are supremely competitive themselves, right? So if you want to go to India or you want to go to, I don't know which other market, you are dealing with a completely different set of dynamics. Mm-hmm. And are you positioned to compete in that dynamic, in those dynamics? Yeah. Are you positioned there, or would somebody who is operating inherently in that market just better suited to deliver the value, right? The third thing which I would think about in this space is the continent by itself. I mean, we're large. I mean, it's like $2.5 trillion. So the question really is, I mean, I've got Nigeria, I've got Ghana, in the north I've got Morocco, Egypt, in the south I've got South Africa, Botswana, a couple of Zambia, So when you think about the size of some of these economies, they're not super large, but they're not small either. So there's enough of a market opportunity, or what I call TAM, right, to go after in this continent itself. And then why do you want to spread yourself thin by going into China and trying to figure out what's going to happen there?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think there's a lot of factors in play. One we already talked about is that talent and that understanding of the market. As much as we've seen all the headlines about how much money is flowing into Africa, the reality is you're always going to have limited resources, right? And so it's important to align that with your strategy as a company. Where do you deploy those resources? Where do you think you can harness the most value to help you grow as an organization?
Well, I'm glad actually you brought up the TAM though, because is Nigeria a market of 200 million people? No. 100 million people are in dire poverty, for real, in the north. And most of the companies that are operating, they're not even in Kaduna. They're not even, right? We're talking Lagos. I mean, okay, maybe.
We're in Kaduna.
All right. Good, but we're talking Lagos. We're talking, when you're talking Ghana, you're talking Accra. You start to really see that there's a city play here, and that a lot of the companies are not actually attacking a large market unless you have a business model that is actually trying to digitize and unbank, bank the unbanked and cash, deal with the cash and all of that.
So I think that is an important problem that needs to be solved. So of course the problem is an opportunity. So so that is an opportunity. It's not a deterrent. It actually should be viewed as an opportunity for fintechs.
Sure.
I would say the numbers are slightly favor the size of the market. Yeah. I'll tell you why. Kenya, let's take Kenya as an example. Kenya is a $100 billion GDP, $200 billion payments market, digital payments market.
Yes, the most advanced.
The most advanced, to 2x GDP, yeah? And M-Pesa did, what, $60 billion last year out of the 200 billion, yeah? So when you think about it, so Kenya advanced, yeah?
Super unique.
Super unique, but
unique.
But let me get there for a minute, right? And now you say, okay, African GDP, I don't know, 54 countries, something like whatever, $2.5 trillion. So we say, okay, the addressable portion of this, right, is what? 10%? $250 billion?
Yeah.
$250 billion, that's a big number, right? And we actually did the maths. That maths actually totals up to, for some of the larger countries, totals up to at least $500-600 billion. That's a big enough TAM for a payments business to go after. I don't need to add $2 trillion or $3 trillion of India GDP to this number, because I've got enough and more to go after in Africa itself to build a very large global business in this continent.
Global African business.
African.
So we come back. So we have two
question.
questions here. I'm going to take them, just yell right here, and then we'll go to the mic. Go ahead.
Hey, my name is Lubao Kraka, product at Visa. So my question is focused on the global expansion. Oftentimes we hear African countries, companies raising big rounds to $30-15 million. And I kind of agree with what Akshay just mentioned. When you hear, for example, Flutterwave expanding, right? I'm from Ivory Coast. Flutterwave is not in Ivory Coast, for example, right? So you hear big fintech companies trying to go worldwide, while we have so many problems in the fintech space locally that are not solved, right?
Okay.
So instead of, that's just my opinion, instead of, my question is, why not expand on a continent before to go worldwide?
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about the Francophone piece, because some of that has been less. Let's take this one as well. And is there a third one? Okay, we'll take the third one, and then we'll end the panel. Go ahead.
All right, so my question is around blockchain technology, actually.
Okay.
So I'm curious about how you all are innovating around blockchain and how that also influences your business model.
Yep, okay, blockchain, and then what's your question right here?
Yes, I'm Serge Do, Senior Vice President from GTP, work in Africa. I see Flutterwave, I see Cellulant. Those are the company that we used to work with in Africa. We work with Visa and MasterCard to do a prepaid Visa card across Africa. So my question that I want to say, it's about talent. We all focus, I know the topic is fintech, but there's such a thing that we need financial education, literacy in Africa. So we also need to develop edutech. All of this talent that you mentioned, from Flutterwave to Cellulant, the local talent need to have some education. We need to have more schools that developing all the coders and all these people in Africa, so that we can, reduce this gap that we're talking about.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
All right, let's take these three questions as we wrap up here. Which ones do you want to address?
So I'll address the first gentleman. First things first, we actually do have operations in Côte d'Ivoire and 19 other countries in Africa. I think that what's important to put in perspective, at least for Flutterwave, is it's very difficult to try to change consumer behavior. And so into your expansion plans, you have to factor in your mission. Our mission is simplifying payments for endless possibilities. I don't want to enter the business of making you realize that you should switch to digital channels. Instead, if you're already using digital channels, I want to make that process easier for you, at least in the first phase, right? Because it's going to be very difficult for me to enter a cash-heavy country that is not native to me and say, I'm going to switch you from cash to transacting digitally. It'll be very difficult to build scale. It'll be very difficult for all of us as a company to exist and be here to talk about how have we scaled.
Yeah. So Emeka, do you want to talk about blockchain? Have you guys looked at it and the expansion in the region? Okay, good.
So yeah, I totally agree. I think we have to harnessed and hone talent internally in Africa. I think it is very, very important because we have problems with unemployment and other things there as well. So I think instead of going outside, I think there are companies that are actually doing it as well. There are programming schools and the rest of them. There are a lot of companies doing this. So I think it's a problem that is actually being addressed.
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting, I was in Nigeria in October with some investors from Europe, and they were asking one of the companies they were looking at, so what schools do your developers go to? Like, what schools do they come out of? And the company explained that every one of their developers was self-taught, that there was no school that they were coming out of. They learned it just
And there's
out there.
that actually, because it's not, you can actually teach yourself. It's not, it's not a...
But I would say there's a correlation between fintech and edtech and any kind of tech. And, and I'll tell you what that correlation is. I saw this in India in the early 2000s, 2005 to 2015, when India was sort of in the same place where Africa is today from a venture capital development point of view. Early days, some venture capital, not too much, but stuff happening, beginning to happen. And what you noticed is that the business models that got funded first were actually business models that needed very little brick and mortar. So, and fintech is smack in that space, usually, other than the cash part of the transaction, right? So it's a lot easier to scale up, and because it's a lot easier to scale up, it's a lot easier to attract capital in.
But sometimes then you run up against real world hardware, hard tech, asset-based businesses, right?
But what that capital flow into fintech does is it puts Africa on the landscape for some of these investors. And let's not underestimate availability of capital. Capital is everything, is almost everything. You can't do anything without capital. As she said rightly, we wouldn't be sitting here without the capital. You know? So I think then the next stage of that is to say what other business models can be funded in Africa, you know, and open up the eyes of those investors and those groups of people looking to fund it, of saying, now I want to do education, I want to do healthcare, and you're already beginning to see this. If you look at the funding rounds today, it's already beginning to happen, right? You're seeing it. And I think that is the beginning of a very large boom of investments in those sectors. And that's how that problem is going to get addressed.
Yeah, and you already see it with some. You know, for example, I invested in an auto tech play, right? And they're trying to create a marketplace, but then they suddenly realize there are not enough workshops. And then there's not enough mechanics who are properly trained. So then they actually have to invest in real things. It can't just be a software play.
And then there's somebody to fund that.
Exactly.
So eventually there'll be somebody to fund that.
Especially those who understand the market at the beginning, that understand that those are the constraints as you're building out the market. Okay, well, thank you so much. And I'm sure there's other questions for the audience, but you guys can find them outside and around today. But join me in thanking my panel as we get this program back on track. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Do you need any help?
No, I'm good. Go ahead, go ahead.
Thank you all for your patience, because we're running a little behind schedule and we want to be mindful of our audience joining us online. We will go straight to our next panel. So we're splitting. For those interested in embedded everything, this panel is taking place in the breakout room. It is being facilitated by Ami Parbu from Action Venture Lab. So if you're interested in the embedded everything panel, please make your way to the breakout room.